Welcome everyone to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, where we dig into the surprising and sometimes downright bewildering ways our modern world shapes our health. I'm Ethan Foster, your local patron saint of dry observations and tactical sarcasm.
And I'm Alara Sky, the witty whipcracker with a penchant for sorting through data and delivering comedic stings. If you're new here, prepare for some head-scratching, light chuckles, and possibly a reevaluation of how you shop for groceries. Because when we say we're about to chat agricultural and pharmaceutical empires, we mean we're putting on the muck boots and wading right in.
Before we take the plunge, let's frame today's conversation. America's health is looking rather grim. In the 1930s, around 7.5% of Americans had chronic illnesses. Now, roughly 60% are dealing with at least one chronic disease. That's not a gentle climb. That's a 700% rocket ride, and an awfully depressing one.
You know, I'd blame Hollywood for sensationalizing everything. But even they don't hand out scripts with lines like, everybody has something and nobody is sure why. Not quite the blockbuster folks are looking for.
Right. The also lovely piece of news is that we're sitting at a 40% obesity rate in this country. Sometimes, I wonder if we should replace the eagle with a donut as our national symbol.
I'd pay good money to see that flag, at least to watch the meltdown that'd follow. But obesity's no joke. It ties into that bigger conversation. We're heavier, sicker, and ironically, we're living shorter lives. Or at least shorter, less healthy ones.
Everyone loves a good irony. We've got more technology, more medication, more chemicals, more everything. And somehow, less health and less time on this planet than our grandparents. That's some cosmic scale comedic timing.
Right? Meanwhile, there's this unholy union between Big Ag and Big Pharma quietly working behind the scenes. It's like the world's oddest buddy cop movie, only these two buddies perpetuate a health crisis. We want to explore how four companies, Bayer, Syngenta, BASF, and Corteva, are dominating agriculture, and how that might tie into our collective prescription refills.
Let's go to the main star in that blockbuster, Bayer. Once upon a time, you'd think of them as the aspirin people. Then they acquired Monsanto, the big name in seeds and agrochemicals, for a casual $63 billion.
I still can't get over that price tag. Talk about taking two separate universes and slamming them into a single reality. Bayer's spread across 80 countries, pharmaceuticals, consumer health, crop science, like a big corporate octopus.
And we land in this bizarre scenario. Bayer sells you the pill to manage your chronic illness, then sells farmers seeds that require repeated chemical interventions, which might circle back to your dinner plate. It's a cunning arrangement that keeps them top of mind and top of wallet.
Let's face it, controlling seeds is controlling food is controlling health is controlling your wallet. Each year, farmers can't just save seeds like in the good old days. It's more, hey, you want seeds? Sure, sign these agreements. Also, buy these matching pesticides and fertilizers, or the seeds break out in hives.
And if those seeds do break out in hives, guess what? Big Pharma has an ointment for that. Let's keep following the money. In the US, the concentration ratio, or CR4, is the measure that says, hey, the top four companies own most of this market. And it's pretty jaw-dropping in agriculture.
Yeah, let's run down some numbers. Beef packing's CR4 soared from 25% in 1977 to 85% by 2018. Pork packing went from 33% in 1977 to 85% by 2018-1976 to 70%. The seeds for corn and soybeans? About 95% or so of U.S. corn intellectual property is dominated by just four companies.
In other words, if you're a farmer, it's not exactly a smorgasbord of choices. It's either dance to their tune or leave the party entirely.
That dynamic leads to industrial-scale farming, with less biodiversity, more chemicals, more soil depletion, and ironically, less nutritious food. Reminds me of those pushy phone contracts from the 90s, except you can't just switch carriers when your plan stinks.
Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical sector is pulling similar stunts, a CR4 of 80% or so in certain drug categories. Here's looking at you. Vaccine market, Pfizer, GSK, Sanofi, and Merck. They own around 80% globally. Similar story with diabetes drugs and oncology.
It's like we're living in a world of corporate board games, except we're the pawns. And they've loaded the dice, locked the board, and glued down the hotels on Park Place.
Perhaps that explains why, in 2024, Big Pharma spent nearly $300 million on lobbying, while Big Ag pitched in over $30 million. Bayer alone spent $6.46 million in the US. Then they waltz over to Europe and drop another 7 to 8 million euros.
Hard to imagine how much farmland, healthcare research, or, I don't know, family orchard expansions we could fund with that lobbying money. But hey, maybe I just can't see the brilliance of it all.
It's more than just money, though. They shape education and policy. Think about it. Subsidies in agriculture reward big yields, monocultures, and heavy pesticide use. It's like handing out ribbons for using the same chemical-laden approach over and over.
Right. And the federal crop insurance program basically says, don't worry if you lose your crop. Just keep doing exactly what you're doing. We'll bail you out. Meanwhile, truly regenerative or sustainable methods struggle to fit that insurance model, or they receive less coverage.
So, if you're a small farmer wanting to rotate your crops, build soil health, or experiment with ancient grains, good luck. The system's stacked against you. Big equipment, big chemicals, big seeds, that's the trifecta that gets all the goodies.
And in healthcare, there's a parallel. Insurance tends to pay for the conventional fix, medications, surgeries, but preventive measures like a balanced diet or stress management aren't exactly top priority, so it's, we'll cover your pills, but your gym membership? Well, that's out of network, sorry.
That's if you're lucky enough to even have coverage. Meanwhile, these companies continue to shape our understanding of health, whether that's medical textbooks quietly co-authored by pharma sponsors, or an agribusiness-funded study that claims everything is fine, no need to worry about pesticides.
We're living in an era where we have to read the fine print on everything, from chemical labels to the footnotes of a non-biased research paper. Did I mention it's exhausting to be a savvy consumer?
That's part of the strategy, I suspect. Make it complicated. Keep us reliant on experts who are, in turn, reliant on corporate funding. For instance, you walk into a grocery store and see labels like natural, organic, GMO-free, grass-fed, free-range, cage-free. It's enough to make your head spin.
The comedic twist is we produce enough food globally to feed about 1.5 times the current population. Yet we have hunger, malnutrition, and a surplus of junk food. Talk about distribution problems.
Meanwhile, the simplest piece in all this, good old-fashioned soil, gets hammered by synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. That depletes beneficial microbes, so the soil can't retain nutrients or water as well. Then we double down on chemicals. It's a vicious circle.
That's the soil microbiome, which is basically the farmland equivalent of our gut microbiome. If you trash the balance with antibiotics or pesticides, you set up a never-ending cycle of damage control.
And guess who's happy to sell you solutions for that damage? Big agriculture. It's like setting your house on fire and then selling you new curtains.
Or in medicine, prescribing a drug that triggers a side effect, then prescribing another drug to tame that side effect, then another for the second side effect. You see the pattern.
We do the same to soil. Use one pesticide. Oops, now the pest got resistant, so let's bring in a stronger pesticide. Oops, now that kills beneficial insects, which means our pollination suffers. Now we need a different chemical. Cue the corporate laughter.
It's an addictive cycle, quite literally, hooking us on a supply chain that we think we can't break free from. Farmers lose the ability to save seeds because big companies own the patents. They also hold the recipe for the specific fertilizer or pesticide that works with those seeds.
It's the handshake from you-know-where. Historically, farmers saved seeds to maintain biodiversity and adapt to local conditions. That was lost in the wave of genetically modified seeds. Actually, it wasn't just lost, it was actively taken away, replaced by no saving seeds agreements.
Meanwhile, we're told, this is necessary to feed the world. But we see mountains of wasted food, plus the reality that our health is tanking. So, feed the world or feed the corporations?
The question practically answers itself. Let's not forget the green revolution of the 1950s. High-yield crops, modern irrigation, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides soared in popularity. We ended up with a lot of cheap calories, great in a pinch, not so great for biodiversity or micronutrients.
That might have saved us from immediate famines back then, but the side effects have marched forward to the present day. Now we're left with a consolidated seed market, exhausted soils, and a nation that's ironically both overfed and undernourished.
And let's not forget the collective expansion of waistlines. We have all these processed foods dominating the grocery aisles, stuff that's been grown in nutrient-poor soils, stuffed with additives, and sold at discount prices.
Then the pharmaceutical side steps in to handle the fallout. Chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, you name it. They've got a pill for it, a subscription-based approach, if you will. Because cures aren't exactly profitable once you fix the underlying issue.
Big Pharma's business model thrives on symptom management. If you ended the root cause, you'd end that continuous revenue. These cycles are eerily similar to the repeated pesticide approach. Perpetual use, perpetual profit.
Now we can rant all day, but let's steer toward solutions. Because right now, I'm worried people are hearing the Jaws theme. And I can't blame them. But we should point to the exit door too.
Good idea. Real lasting change tends to come from the bottom up. That means we, as consumers and producers, can demand or implement alternatives. That starts with regenerative agriculture, healing the soil, practicing crop rotation, using cover crops, letting beneficial insects handle some of those pests. And we can look at how we feed ourselves. We might choose to buy from local farmers who actually nurture their land. Maybe that means a farmer's market, a CSA subscription, or direct farm-to-consumer clubs that prioritize low-chemical, nutrient-dense food. If enough people shift their dollars, the market eventually notices. That's capitalism's bright side. If we stop funneling money into the same old system, new solutions can flourish.
In healthcare, it's about prevention, nutrition, movement, stress reduction, all those lifestyle pieces that never get the fancy marketing campaigns. When fewer people need the pill, the system starts to pivot.
Doesn't happen overnight, though. Plenty of corporate inertia tries to keep us in the loop of spray this, take that. But each time you opt for a farm that invests in soil health instead of synthetic chemicals, or see a practitioner who emphasizes lifestyle changes, you're undermining the status quo.
And maybe that's the comedic twist. We're waiting for a top-down solution, but the real fix is in the tiny daily decisions we make. Sort of like pulling weeds in a garden. Nobody's going to do it for us, and we can't keep hoping for a magical pesticide. We're the pesticide for the system, ironically, by refusing to let it keep poisoning us.
Precisely. Also, we have to remember that technology isn't evil. Synthetic inputs, pharmaceuticals, they all have some place. The real issue is that they've become the default rather than a strategic last resort.
Right. It's about balance. If the soil is healthy, maybe you don't need that pesticide in the first place. If you're fueling your body well, maybe you don't need that extra medication. It's that radical notion of dealing with root causes instead of slapping on Band-Aids.
Which leads us to an interesting question. Are we stuck in a contrived scarcity mentality thanks to these big players? Because they profit when we think we can't do anything else.
Bingo. The marketing is, there is no alternative. But ironically, we can see glimmers of hope in the rise of regenerative farms, direct-to-consumer clubs, and integrative medicine. The biggest challenge is awareness and cost.
Exactly. The reason mainstream groceries aren't flooded with that type of food is that the subsidies and market structures favor the big chemical approach. It's cheaper, apparently, to destroy the soil than to invest in long-term resilience.
And it's cheaper to pop a pill for heartburn than to explore changes in diet and stress management. That's our quick fix culture in a nutshell, but the cracks are showing.
The cracks are definitely showing, which is why we're here, shining a light on them. On Dr. Mercola's cellular wisdom, we're big on the idea that small concerted steps can shift entire systems.
Absolutely. We're not powerless. If we keep pushing for better food and better health interventions, it'll slowly reshape markets, like turning a massive cargo ship. Doesn't happen quickly, but it happens.
We should mention that the best part about choosing regenerative agriculture or integrative health is that it usually benefits you immediately. You feel better, the planet gets a break, and you're no longer complicit in propping up the old system.
Let's also not blame farmers or patients. Everyone's working within a machine that's been engineered over decades. Farmers are told, go big or go home. Patients are told, take these pills and call me in the morning. It's the structure itself that needs a fundamental renovation.
Couldn't agree more. And look, some might argue that big companies are innovators, bringing us advanced seeds or life-saving medications. There's merit to that. But if we rely on these innovations to the point of ignoring simpler, sustainable, or cheaper options, we're asking for trouble.
Precisely. After all, real innovation shouldn't hamper natural biodiversity or overshadow crucial prevention efforts. It should complement them. If your technology kills soil microbes en masse, maybe it's time to refine it.
Or if your medication just creates more side effects than it fixes, maybe it's time to go back and examine diet or environment. The rebellious notion that we can look for simpler solutions might actually lighten the burdens on us and our soil.
Now that's a comedic twist. Maybe the big fancy technologies aren't so fancy after all, if we can achieve better outcomes with a healthy microbial community in the ground, or a plate of fresh whole foods on our table.
So, to circle back, we have massive consolidation in agriculture, massive consolidation in pharma, and a shared business model rooted in dependency. They both profit when you keep coming back for more seed inputs, more pesticide cocktails, more prescription refills.
Meanwhile, the solution might be as simple as supporting small, local, regenerative farms and focusing on diet, movement, and stress reduction in our personal lives.
That's our bottom-up revolution. We can vote with our dollars and invest in farmers who cultivate real soil fertility. The same mindset goes for healthcare, seeking out practitioners who see you as a whole human rather than a walking copay.
It all begins with waking up to the bigger picture. Because once you see how the puzzle fits, it's hard to unsee it. Then you realize you do have power.
Indeed, and while it's daunting, it's also empowering. We can resist the narrative that we need to keep swallowing pills and chemicals. We can opt for a different story.
That's the gist. Big Ag and Big Pharma have rigged the system toward a cycle of dependency. But each of us has an exit strategy. We can embrace regenerative approaches, from farmland to personal health. We might not topple these giants overnight, but we can starve them one purchasing decision at a time.
And on that note, we wrap up another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Thanks for tuning in. We hope we gave you plenty to think about, and maybe a few comedic lines to lighten the load.
Remember, your health, your food choices, and your environment are all connected. You're not just a passenger on this ride. You're also the mechanic. Or the wisecracking backseat driver, if you prefer. Either way, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep laughing along the way.
We appreciate your time, and we look forward to diving deeper into the wild world of health, sustainability, and everything in between on our next episode.
Until then, stay curious, stay healthy, and maybe hug a farmer, provided they aren't buried under mounds of paperwork from Big Ag. We'll see you next time on Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom.